Ladies and gentlemen, very good evening to you and welcome to this month's Wellington Trust Heritage Lecture. My name is Alistair Chapman. I'm the chairman of the Wellington Trust, and an enormous warm welcome to you all, especially to those who may be coming on for the first time. Before I proceed, I would just like to give you my usual monthly housekeeping notes, if I may. You will have the opportunity to ask questions from Jenny Moseley, our lecturer this evening. And in order to do so, you will see at the bottom of your screen, hopefully, a Q&A icon. And if you would like to click onto that, you will be able to type in your question. And Fiona Sparks, who is our trust manager, will be fielding those questions during the course of the lecture, and we will then give them to Jenny at the end. You will notice that there is a chat icon at the bottom. That works very well after the formal part of the lecture when we go into our what I call our end of evening wash up, and you're very welcome for that to stay for that informal stage. Please note that it may take a minute or two for Matt Edgar, who is our IT guru, to bring you into those. So you will be brought in. So if you're suddenly seeing that nothing is happening, don't worry. If you're still there, don't go away, and you'll be brought into the lecture. So there we are. We've got question and answers sorted out, and I've told you don't use the chat icon during the lecture. The recording this month will be, the link will be sent around as always after the lecture once it's available. And I can promise you that what you're going to be seeing over the next 45 minutes or so looks absolutely fascinating. Which leads me on to welcome, if I may, our lecturer this evening, who is no more than my great and fond colleague on the Wellington Trust, our marketing and PR lead trustee, Jenny Moseley. Now, as you can see on the screen in front of you, Jenny was at the National Geographic magazine. She was there for probably a good 25 years, although I think when you get there for 25 years, you get the gold watch and then you actually forget how long you've been there. So that is the estimate, 25 years, I think, Jenny. During that time, she was working very much in membership services, marketing, educational, exhibitions, explorations, anything that had to be done in the area of marketing and PR. That was Jenny's role, and she finished up as an assistant vice president of the National Geographic magazine, and what a great publication that was, and still is, I believe. Her interest is not only in the Vickers Vimy scheme, which she will tell you all about. She was involved in that over a period of 15 years. It was a very long-term project, but also she's been involved in projects around Captain Cook and his naturalist on board, Joseph Banks, and also in the footsteps of Captain Robert Falcon Scott, who, as you may remember, was Peter Scott's father in the Antarctic. She has also been involved in covering Richard Branson and Steve Fawcett's memorable ballooning flights, or two, I believe, across the Atlantic. And she has been involved, she's now going to tell us about the 3 reenactments of the Vickers Vimy flights. So Jenny, no more ado, over to you.
Thank you very much, Alistair, and good evening, everyone. Right, Vickers Vimy did 3 long-distance flights, ostensibly to prove that long-distance flights were viable, because remember, these first flights were only 16 years after the Wright brothers flight, so a lot of development during that time. And it was kicked off by the Daily Mail providing a prize of £10,000 for the first airman to cross the Atlantic. Following that was the London-Australia flights, sponsored by the Australian government, again with £10,000 as the prize. And finally, London to South Africa by the South African government in 1920, again, a whopping £10,000 prize, which is about £150,000 today. So why a Vickers Vimy? Well, the Vickers Vimy was built too late to see action in World War I, so there were a few of them around. Built as a heavy bomber, she was an enormous aeroplane, as I'm going to show you in a moment. All three of the flights I've just described to you were completed in a Vickers Vimy, but three separate ones, whereas our reenactment flights were completed in the same Vickers Vimy. So why start with the Australia flight? Well, that's kind of down to one of the pilots of the Australia flight, Lang Kidby. He and Pete are both very keen aviators. And one night in Australia, after a race that Lang had organised and Peter had won, they sat around a campfire somewhere out in the outback and talked about what the most famous flights had been and what, where the achievements were, if you like. Lots to choose from, and there was a great deal of arguing going on, but Lang won and the Australia flight was born. Here are a few the specifications, and I've got to put my glasses on to read this. She's 68 feet wide. So was the original aeroplane. The propellers were 10 foot 6 inches, 10 foot 8 inches. She's 43 feet in length and 16 feet 4 inches in height. So she's quite a big aeroplane. The first engines that were used by the replica were Chevrolet V8s from dragsters and Chevy racing trucks, whereas the original flight were Rolls-Royce Eagle 8s, V12s. None of those left around today. The second flight to South Africa was done with BMW engines, specially built for the hot and high conditions over Africa. And the final flight that we did, as we did them in the wrong order, was with Arenda aircraft engines. Those were also V8s. So she saw quite a change in her power as time was going on during these three expeditions. And here she is, mighty aircraft. This photograph taken in 1919 by Captain Ross Smith. And here's a cutaway to show you a little bit about how she might have been built. The Vimy, the replica, was built from the 4,000 pages of original plans. A few changes, not the original cypress wood that was a spruce, I think, actually, that was used in the first plane. So we had to use a different kind of wood. But the rest of it, fabric, cotton fabric, etc., not allowed to use the original dope because it was flammable. Some differences between the two flights. We also had to have radios and a fuel computer because of aviation guidelines. This is John Lanou, who's a Hollywood set builder, actually. So no better person to build a replica from the original plans. And here's John stitching the cotton together. 10,000 stitches were needed to stitch that cotton together, all done by hand. And here she is from above with the first fabric going on. This was about the time when my editor rang me and said, "Have I got an assignment for you?" I think they were confident by then that their sponsorship money was going to reap rewards. So I was brought in 1993. So her first flight was London to Australia, original 1919, replica flight 1994. Our heroes, Sir Ross and Sir Keith Smith. Ross Smith had been a pilot for T.E. Lawrence in the Middle East. Both were in the RAF, and Keith Smith on the right was shot down and became a prisoner of war. But after the war, they had quite a lot of time on their hands, as you might imagine, so entered into the spirit of the challenge of the Daily Mail. Modern day heroes, Lang Kidby, Australian, real hard man. Nothing fazed him. Whatever went wrong, he was always coming up with ideas, however difficult and however strenuous, to sort things out. Peter Macmillan on the right, the ideas man behind the project, and in fact the money man, put $1 million of his own money into building this aircraft and sending her off on her first expedition to Australia. You'll see there are two main sponsors, National Geographic Society and Shell. Shell provided the fuel all the way through to Australia at various points along the way. An enormous logistical challenge, to be honest. And one of my jobs was to keep both of the sponsors happy and, frankly, from each other's throats, because there's always a competition when you have different objectives in mind. So here are our Australian heroes in 1919, getting ready for their flight. And here's Peter in California, where the Vimy was built. And you'll see that she's called the Spirit of Brooklands. The Vickers factory was within the confines of the Brooklands motor race track. Quite a large factory at the time, went on to build Wellingtons later on, but Brooklands, kind of a spiritual home, if you like, and so we call her the Spirit of Brooklands to honor the earlier building of the Vickers Vimy. She is now back at Brooklands, having completed her flights, so do go along and see her. She's on display, and every time I go, I give her a kiss and pat her on the nose, because she became very, very precious to me. So you've got this aircraft built in California. How do you get her across to Europe, to England, to start this flight? Well, you take her apart and you put her in the belly of a C-130 airplane. And I was there this day when she arrived, and I must admit, looking at her and thinking, gosh, she's much bigger than I thought from the pictures that I'd already seen. But we went ahead then and put her back together and did a few flights around the country, the south anyway, and eventually ended up for takeoff at the Farnborough Air Show. And here she is. And my favorite quote of this whole operation was, "Jenny, where would you like Concorde?" So I really enjoyed that. Lots of flying from the air show at Farnborough. Lots of display flying before we left. And here she is crossing the white cliffs of Dover, the ocean, towards France. That went off without a hitch, as did much of the flying across Europe, at the beginning of the flying across Europe. But when we got to Italy, we hit a small problem in that we hit a very, very strong storm. This is in Pisa, and they can hardly hold on to the aeroplane. The winds were so strong, the rain was pounding down, and the eye of the storm crossed over, and they pushed her into a hangar and just about got her in before the second half of the storm hit. Otherwise she would have been lost, because a nearby crane fell over and broke into two, and with such enormous wingspan, she'd have just taken off by herself. So off we go from Pisa, and here she is over the Leaning Tower. This was the day, bright sunshine, a day afterwards, but the traffic below her was moving faster than she was, and when they realized they were doing only 16 knots, they decided to turn around and have another go another day. And the rest of the flying across Europe towards Egypt took place without too much of a difficulty. And here she is over the pyramids, the first photograph since of a Vimy, of course, since Captain Sir Ross Smith was flying around the area with T.E. Lawrence. Onwards, across Saudi Arabia. To take these wonderful pictures, we had 2 chase planes. We had an Australian Army Nomad, a big heavy lifting plane, and an Islander for quick flights, if you like. But all of them made it all the way to Australia, despite some difficulties along the way. We went to Bahrain, courtesy of the Bahrain government and the royal family. And here is the Crown Prince's stallions out greeting the Vickers Vimy. They had to flatten the desert to make a runway for us. And I was there to see this. And I suspect that every one of those horses is worth more than the Vimy. So we were careful not to get too close to her with those big propellers. Lots of celebrating, singing, dancing, saber rattling, all sorts of stuff going on. Really welcomed us, and we stayed a few days there, and then the plane took off again. I stayed behind to come back to the UK. I had to keep popping backwards and forwards because I had a regular job to do. This was an editorial assignment, but I was also working in the other areas that Alistair described. On we went again, and here you go. You can see in the background the Taj Mahal. The weather was clear. We were very pleased about that. And if you were wondering how that photograph was taken, here's our photographer, Jim Stanfield, over on the strap to the fuselage, which he was on many occasions throughout the flight, to get the best photographs over the heads of the 2 pilots. Mountains were a problem wherever we went, and the Vimy climbed very slowly. At one of the press conferences, Lang Kidby was asked, how long does she take to get to 15,000 feet? And he said, about 10 hours. And that was the truth. She flew relatively low most of the time, but had to prepare to climb over the mountains well in advance so that her height would achieve a safe pass through. And here's a picture that tugs at my heart. What's going on here? The 2 pilots are obviously worried about something. And if you're flying an aeroplane and the propeller stops, then you know you've got something to worry about. What was going on was that they couldn't see the ground. They're not very high here, but when they got lower, the stubble was being burned off by the farmers below. So they couldn't see where they were going. And it was obviously they were going to have a hard landing. And they came down in a paddy field, bumped a lot, made a terrible mess of the landing gear, and landed in the paddy field. And here they are, Dan Nelson, the engineer, on the left-hand side, looking at the damage caused to the landing gear. As always, wherever she went, crowds came out of nowhere, many of them smoking on this day, which worried Peter quite a lot, because although she'd been protected against certain flammable incidents, a cigarette wouldn't have helped. And this is the time when Peter looked the most dejected, you know, thinking that this adventure might end in the paddy field. But Lang, true to what I've said before, well, let's just get on with it and build a runway. So here he is, moving by hand first, and then with the JCB, which didn't work properly, with one tread not working, so it kept going round in circles. So it was quite a challenge for him to flatten the runway like this. Very dirty and stressful work. Meanwhile, I was in Jakarta, and Captain Mick Reynolds from the Australian Army Air Force and I and many others were working on getting a spare engine from Australia in the diplomatic bag, and also the equipment and bungee cords and stuff that we needed to repair the undercarriage. So working terribly hard. There were a lot of similarities between the original 1919 flight and the 1994 flight. This one picture is taken in 1919, where the Vimy got bogged down in the mud after heavy rains, and the natives, the folks who lived around, took the bamboo roofs off their huts and made a runway so that the Vimy could take off. We were always, wherever we were, surrounded with people who wanted to help. Anything we needed was found for us from somewhere. So here comes the cavalry. This is the Nomad arriving with the engine and the repair kit for the wheels, the undercarriage. Engine maneuvered into the Vimy by hand, the same way as it would have been done before, on bamboo poles. Here she is revving up the engine to see what was going on, whether it was going to be okay. And after 8 minutes, she took off. An amazing achievement of engineering, frankly. So here we were, the support team, hopping down the Indonesian islands until we got to the Timor Sea, and then I was on board the Islander as the Vimy flew across the Timor Sea to land in Darwin, talking to Peter, egging him on, nearly there, won't be long, you've done so well, fantastic news, etc. So we were all happy when she landed safely in Australia. Lots of interviews, always. Total hours flown, the original flight, 135 hours and 55 minutes. The reenactment, 148 hours and 35 minutes, mostly because of the red tape and all the arrangements that had to be made to take off and land in various countries, which the original flight didn't have. And I might add a plague in India, which held them up, and they had to be tested to make sure they weren't carrying the plague. But it was worthwhile. It resulted in a National Geographic front page. Once I'd persuaded the editor to take off the poison dart frog, Vimy that will sell many more magazines. So eventually he did. And now I'm going to take you flying. So what's next? Well, why don't we take her apart, get P&O to sponsor the shipping and send her back to Jenny in England to be put back together. Amazing team of engineers and technicians helped put it back together again. Here she is going into the hangar at Farnborough, courtesy of British Aerospace. And gradually, she got herself back together again and ready for the South African flight. We flew some air shows to raise money and get some awareness and publicity, and to encourage new sponsors for the second flight. And here we go, 1920, the original, and 1999 for the Vimy reenactment. And two more heroes, Quentin Brand and von Reinveld. South Africans, because you had to be a national to earn the prize. And here are our two pilots, John Lanou, who built the Vimy, and Mark Rebholz, who was the backbone of the project all the way through. Terrific man. The original crew and our crew, the two pilots plus two tutors below, photographers, plus the third photographer, main photographer, Pete McBride, who took this photograph. She was repainted and called the Silver Queen because the original flight had been called the Silver Queen. So we were honoring her. And the two tutors looked after 5 students that had won an essay competition sponsored by Royal Mail. And they joined in Nairobi and flew all the way down to Cape Town. And here we are just in takeoff from Munich, where lots of discussions going on with BMW, lots of interviews, lots of TV. And this is the team getting ready for the departure. In the air at last. Similar things happened along the way due to weather, but I won't repeat what happened during the first trip. But here's a fantastic photograph of the Vimy over the pyramids, a fisheye lens that Pete McBride, the photographer, strapped to the wing to take these remarkable pictures. And Kilimanjaro, we did have to fly quite high there, but good old BMW engines did it for us. Looking at the animals below, and then the Victoria Falls. A magical moment for all of us. And it's the first time ever I had to get out my National Geographic credit card and hire an aircraft to get myself and my students and the photographers from Harare to Bulawayo, so that we could be there in time for the flight over the Victoria Falls. I love the way the rainbows popped up as if by magic. Lots of education along the way. Classes were booked to come out and see us by the local representatives, and sometimes kids would just turn up on their own. Various tribes came out to find us and wish us luck. This is Samburu tribe and the Masai. And this guy is under the wing praying for the rain to stop, because we were in danger of being bogged down and not being able to take off, rather like the original flight, the Atlantic one. But the skies cleared and we were able to take off. But here comes the second accident. Wind blowing fast, gust of wind just touched the plane onto the runway and destroyed the aileron. More hand holding, head holding rather. I was doing the hand holding from afar. You know, when you're doing this kind of trip and you're in the middle of nowhere and something goes wrong, you really have to be very imaginative in order to get it fixed and move on. And John Lanou walked to the nearest village and got the parts that he needed to fix the Vimy. And here they are, putting things back together again, ready for the flight to Cape Town. And here's the first sight of land in Cape Town, crossing the coast. Safe arrival, and kids once again making models, drawings, poems, all sorts of souvenirs for the pilots to cherish. Total hours flown, the original flight, 132 hours and 12 minutes, and our flight, 109 and 30 minutes. The original flight was completed in a de Havilland DH9, but they did still get the prize. Let's go flying. So to the Atlantic Challenge, the first in 1919 and our last in 2005. John Alcock and Arthur Whitten Brown were the two pilots who were in charge of the Vimy. They entered the race quite late, and that's why the weather caused them, again, such a lot of problems. Here are our two pilots, the late Steve Fawcett and Mark Rebholz as navigator. Steve was the pilot on this occasion. Tea under the wing, how civilized, under the first Vimy flight. And here she is, the first Vimy flight taking off from Newfoundland. Heavily laden, as you might imagine. Fuel ran out along the way, but they made it safely in 16 hours and 12 minutes, I think. But they landed like this. They had mistaken some of the peat bog at Derry Gimler as grass, and so tipped over forward. Here's the telegram. Vimy arrived Clifton. Machine damaged, though landing on bog, Alcock. This is only a few miles from the Marconi station, so quite fitting, I think. Alcock and Brown fly the Atlantic, make 1,980 miles in 16 hours, 12 minutes, sometimes upside down in dense, icy fog. Alcock complained that his sandwiches froze. So here's our aeroplane. Remember, she's in California now, having been rebuilt, and she has to fly all the way up to Canada, to Newfoundland, with new engines, Arenda engines. So here she is doing some engine testing without the cowls on. A bit of formation flying in Toronto with some World War I replica aircraft. And the Vimy had to join in, didn't she? Right, so here she is in Newfoundland, in the hangar, getting ready for flying with our intrepid pilots, Steve and Mark. Some test flying over Newfoundland just to make sure everything that they could do was done and the aircraft was safe. More test flying in Newfoundland. Meanwhile, in Clifton, I was in Clifton, and here is part of my team. We were preparing the press, preparing all the celebrations. She was in the Irish Times and announcements, and that was to bring as many people as we could get to the Alcock and Brown Festival at Clifton. Lots of TV interviews, lots of radio interviews, sometimes asking me questions I had no idea how to answer, but somehow I bluffed my way through. The gentleman on my left is Anton van Ginkel, who was on the South African flight. In between times, as one of the students, but in between times he'd got his PPE at 17 and then was a fully fledged pilot just a few years later. I called him to Clifton to assist me because running the base, you can't run around and do things as well. So he was my runner. Then this turned up. This piece of the Vickers Vimy was given to my grandfather by Alcock. So what the devil was it? Well, it's a differential throttle that Alcock would twist in order to synchronize the speed of the two Eagle 8 engines. And we know that because Dizzy Addicott in the chair, being shown it by the bank manager and the chairman of the Chamber of Commerce, in whose vault it had been living for some time. Dizzy confirmed that. Dizzy had been a Vickers test pilot and had flown the 1969 Vimy that the apprentices built at Brooklands. So he was a great man to have around, not only in California during the building, but we took him to Ireland and he was a fount of information. So you see that piece of equipment there. Here's the Science Museum Vimy with a plastic differential throttle. So we knew it was accurate and it's probably worth quite a lot of money. Back at Clifton, we decided to land on the Connemara Ballycalini golf course as being a nice flat area with a sandy links course. And so we plotted out the route across to land on the 8th fairway. And I drew these maps to send to Stephen Mark in Canada. Press position, sandy mound. Watch out for the four-foot wall. This is where the emergency services will be. This is where you're going to touch down. There's a road. We will keep the public away from you and the press away from you until you've landed and are safely tied down. And then I took something from the golf handbook and plotted some more information there. And I made the crew at the golf course mow the grass, the rough grass, paint a white X on the runway, which was the optimum landing spot, over that 4-foot wall. And then I made them draw a central line as well, so that Stephen and Mark could see where they were headed for. Meanwhile, Clifton, an absolutely amazing Chamber of Commerce. They took to the Vimy so well. Remember, this is the making of them in 1919, so 1919, get it right. It's what they're famous for. So they really entered into the spirit of it. And everything I asked for was found. It didn't matter what I asked for, they found it and delivered it to me. All set, ready to go? Maybe not. News update. Vimy flight now delayed until further notice. And as usual, the Guinness sign on the pub. Vimy delayed until further notice. Was supposed to be arriving Sunday the 26th. Monday would have been the gala ball. They'd planned a gala ball for 200 people. And my sad news when I got the call from Mark to tell me it was delayed was to go and tell them, the owner of the Alcock and Brown Hotel, that there wasn't going to be a gala ball the next day because the Vimy wasn't coming. She took it very, very calmly. The lambs in the cold store, the fish is also safe. There's no problem with that. The desserts haven't been done yet, but oh my God, I've got 3 sacks of carrots. So everywhere you went in Clifton for dinner over the next few days was carrot soup, carrot cake, carrot this, carrot that. Everybody, all the restaurants had got carrots on the menu until they ran out. Back in Newfoundland, back into the hangar to fix the small technical hitch. Once that was fixed, here's Mark looking out of the hotel window because of the weather. The weather had turned really bad. And here's a weather map from the 2nd of July. It was blowing a gale, absolute gale across the Atlantic, and he had to wait till the weather cleared until such time as they could take off. Lots more news conferences in Newfoundland, St. John's. And finally, I got the call to say they were leaving. So all hands to the deck on both sides of the Atlantic. Here's Mark in his flight suit. Steve's obviously very happy to be underway here. Goodbye to John, the engineer. John and his team flew the Atlantic with Steve's crew in Steve's private jet. So they had a nice time drinking champagne and eating smoked salmon and caviar on the way over. And here's the Vimy getting ready for her takeoff. She's very heavily laden with fuel. There were extra fuel tanks in the front and in the back of the aeroplane to see her across the Atlantic. Taxiing out, ready to take off. And in the air, you heard me say she was very heavily laden with fuel, which was fine at low altitude, but once she got up to about 1,200 feet, Mark suddenly realized that his feet were slipping on the floor of the plane, and put his torch on, looked down, and his feet were covered with fuel. Very dangerous situation because a fire would have been absolutely disastrous. No way of jettisoning fuel, no way of landing back again because she was too heavy. The undercarriage would have collapsed. So he turned off everything or didn't touch anything electrical, switched the fuel from one tank to another, and kept doing that all the way across the Atlantic so that it wouldn't happen again and the Vimy would be stable. So are they on their way at last? Here I am at the golf club. We'd set up the tracking station, and here I am at this moment in time doing press releases and contacting the press and taking phone calls from Prestwick, who were ringing me every time they got a call through to say where the exact position where Steve and Mark were. I would plot that on the map. I did the night shift, and then Pat Joyce, who's an aviator himself, and I stayed on plotting things across the Atlantic. We were receiving messages every 2 degrees, not a set time, so we could plot on the map where she'd got to, and you can see she's right on course here, heading for Ireland. On the phone constantly. You wouldn't want to know what my phone bill was for those couple of weeks in Ireland. She's getting closer and closer. Meanwhile, I'm directing an air show from my mobile phone from the Australian Air Force, which was quite interesting. Leave now. How long will it take you to get here? Stay below 1,500 feet, because I wasn't sure what height the Vimy would come in at first. Some locals dressed up as if they were welcoming the 1919 flight, and they're coming. take these wonderful aerial photographs, I had begged, borrowed, didn't steal a helicopter and hired a local photographer to go out and meet the aircraft because we wanted those beautiful moments captured coming across the coast. Touchdown. She'd arrived. Taxiing up the runway with all the holes I'd made them fill in with extra sand to make sure she didn't bump along the way. And 2 very relieved pilots. Of course, there was the obligatory pint of Guinness. People were let through, photographers were let through to do interviews and you know, be able to touch this Vimy, not quite 100 years after the first one, but you know, getting close. A very tired Mark, the navigator, very tough job. Steve, always smiling, took everything in his stride. But said afterwards he'd had an amazing fight, a very physical fight with the Vimy across to make her way across. So smiling all the time, and here's a very happy Jenny. I was so relieved, I can't tell you. On to the press conference. And then taken back. Oh, this man saw the first flight land, and so took great pleasure, as did Mark, in saying hello to him and chatting about his memories of the first flight landing and the excitement that it caused. They took us then back in vintage Rolls Royces and other vintage cars. Where they got them from, or from on the west coast of Ireland, I don't know, but several of them turned up to take passengers back to the hotel. By this time, I'd been up a day, a night, and a day, so it's no wonder I'm looking a bit tired. But these guys had just flown the Atlantic, and they don't look as tired as I do. Original flight, 16 hours and 28 minutes. Reenactment flight, 18 hours and 19 minutes. Bit more wind, I think, to push through, but equally freezing and difficult and awful conditions for both crews. Celebrations. Congratulations to Steve and Mark from the Griffin's Bakery in Galway. And we did at last get to have that dinner, 200-person dinner. So we were all very happy the next day, got some sleep, and it was an absolutely amazing reception that the pilots received from the people from Clifton. That's it. Thank you very much. That's me in the Vimy on one of my flights. And I'm going to hand back to you now, Alistair.
Jenny, I think that's amazing. I don't feel airsick, but I certainly feel exhausted watching that. I mean, 3 flights, for heaven's sake, in one evening. It's quite remarkable, and I do congratulate you and also those other people involved for such a fine record, photographic record of what happened. I mean, that in itself is a fantastic document to have. 2 things. While Fee just collects some questions, hopefully, I want to ask you. One is, do you think the days of replica aviation are now finished, or do you think there are any more projects in the offing?
Oh, I don't think they'll ever be finished. Someone will always find another flight that they want to recreate. If it's not a flight, it will be an ocean voyage. If it's not an ocean voyage, it'll be across land.
Yeah.
There's the spirit of adventure, especially in these islands, if I may say so. You know, where a lot of the these voyages of discovery originated. That spirit is still alive. There's still a lot more to do. And I won't tell you what I'm working on, but I have another project.
Oh, very good. We'll hear about that hopefully in the next few years.
It will take a few. It'll take a few years. We're working on it now, but it takes a long time to get everything in place.
Oh. But what was quite clear, including those great clips, the film clips, comparing the original with the new one, or the more recent flight. What was absolutely clear was actually there was no shortage of peril, and the perils, the problems arising were very similar in both on both occasions. And what an enormous courage for those guys. I mean, one of the clips was just showing this the Vimy just flying off over a cloud, and having spent a little while sitting in a helicopter in the middle of a cloud and thinking, my God, what happens if something flaps out into our visor? It's a kind of frightening experience. And the other one is talking about frightening. What do you remember your most tense moment on any of those three expeditions?
Yes, well, there were a few, but I suppose the most tense I got was when I was on a flight to Bangkok to meet the guys to fly onwards to the Indonesian chain, and a voice came over the radio, would Jenny Moseley please make herself known to the crew? That doesn't sound good. So I was taken up to the cockpit, and the captain said, we've had a message, the Vimy has crashed. And that was the crash in Surabaya.
Why?
And the news that we have from a passing aircraft is that there are 3 survivors. And I knew very well that there were 4 on board the Vimy. So my heart was wrenched at that moment. But the end of that message said, you need to call your husband. So I got off the aeroplane and called my husband Ian. And I then found out why there were only 3 survivors around the plane. And that was because Peter Macmillan, the pilot, had walked off to find a phone to ring Ian to find out where I was so he could talk to me. So that was relief in the greatest degree. The other one that I remember is when the plane had crashed in Surabaya, and the rescue planes had gone out and landed on the dirt runway, and we got a message that they were testing the engines and getting ready to fly back. So we sat on the runway, well, not literally, but sat beside the runway and waited and waited and waited, and it started to get dark. Vimy has no lights. And those tense couple of hours waiting for her to appear, and she did out of the gloom and landed safely. So we were on our way again.
Wow. One wonders why it all happens, really. But the answer is because it's there, I suppose. It's the same old answer, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, bless you, Jenny. Thank you very much. That was fascinating. I really enjoyed that. Now, Fiona, do we have any questions? I think we may do.
We do. But first of all, I have John Hinchcliffe, who would like to say, no Q&A, just brilliant, in capital letters. Thank you.
There we are.
Quite agree.
Very good.
Quite agree. And Stephen Bassett would also like to say, no question, I have to leave, but must just say, what an engaging and evocative talk. Just brilliant. So there you go, Jen. And then Stephen Taylor and Richard Bridges would like to know why she was called the Vimy.
Oh, she was named after the Battle of Vimy Ridge in the First World War, where the Canadians lost a lot of troops. And so it was a gesture towards honouring those who lost their lives in that battle. And as you probably know, all the Vickers aircraft, or at least most of them at that time, began with the letter V. So the 2 reasons why she was called a Vimy. Yeah.
Lovely. Richard Shuttleworth would like to know, will she ever fly again?
Over my dead body. She is safely tucked around. She's done, I don't know, somewhere, we calculated it once, close to 100,000 miles. She was x-rayed and really maintained very well between flights. And the flight into Brooklands was another hair-raising moment because the runway is so short. Mick Oakey, are you there? Can you unmute yourself and your video if you are? You might not be there. Mick Oakey was editor of Aeroplane Monthly at the time, and is now owner and editor of the Aviation Historian. And some of his photographs are used in this presentation, but he was a great support. And we both held our breath as she cleared the lights over the runway and managed to pull to a stop before the end of the grass runway. So yes, that was a bit tense, but you know, everything about the Vimy was tense. She comes out at Brooklands regularly for engine displays, so they'll start up the engines and taxi her out onto, push her out actually onto the old motor racing circuit, and do an engine demonstration for the public. And an engineer who accompanied us to Ireland for the second flight of the Vimy in Ireland, Clive Edwards, is her engineer and comes and looks after her and fires up the engines for the crowd. She's very loud. She is very loud, and those props do, displace the air quite considerably. But no,
Mike is actually here, but he can't unmute himself, he said.
Oh.
Maybe
well,
he'll stay on.
I give you credit for being so supportive, Mick. So thank you for attending. I hope I don't get any technical questions. What else?
And then the last one from Anne Grimsdale. What did the enactment pilots say about how the Vimy was to handle? Were there any records or notes from the original pilots to help them?
Yes, there's quite a lot from each of the flights actually that they researched in detail before they left. All three flights came across the same problems that we had in our Vimy. Very strenuous flying, very tiring flying. Not that I ever piloted her, I've been in her, but I never got, although Mark said he would teach me to fly and I said, no, thank you. But very strenuous flying. And when you're flying in the dark, as they were across the Atlantic, as were Alcock and Brown, you can't see the instruments, and the instruments were pretty much the same in both airplanes. Some modern technology tucked away in case it was needed, but just planning the route at night using the stars across the Atlantic. Our trips were more complicated by formalities, if you like, than the original trips. But I take my hat off to all sets of pilots, because the original ones did it just full of daring do without knowing what was ahead of them. The reenactment pilots, having read all the diaries and understood all the difficulties that those original pilots had, did it anyway, knowing what they might run into, and prepared to give their lives, if necessary, to achieve the goals that had been set mostly by themselves.
Fabulous. Right, we've got a couple more. We got time? We okay on time?
Yes, let's go for it.
Richard Bridges, why was that bit of kit in the bank? Not quite sure.
Well, because the grandson who then owned it didn't want to risk it being stolen, so he put it in the bank vault.
Right. Okay. Right. Roger Huffling has said, should it not have been mentioned that the 3 were the first direct flights in each case, with that across the Atlantic being the first non-stop crossing? It wasn't Lindbergh.
Absolutely right. Thank you, Roger. Absolutely right. You know, everybody thinks of Lindbergh, and he did have some amazing achievements, but several years after Alcock and Brown made their transatlantic flight.
Okay, and then the last one, were there no extra instruments in the cockpit to repeat those on the narcals? Narcals, sorry, my glasses.
Okay.
Nacelles, is it?
They had to have a radio, and they had to have a fuel computer. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to fly anywhere. But across the Atlantic, I'm not sure Mark used the fuel computer. He did it by just testing how much the nose went down when Steve took his hands off of the wheel, and then adjusting the fuel in all the tanks accordingly. They did carry with them a GPS on that flight. The rest of the trips were done by maps, which regularly flew out of the cockpit, by the way, and they had to start again and navigate by things that they remembered. But across the ocean, the GPS was taped to the outside of the plane with the rescue boat, the blow-up inflatable boat. But at one point going across the Atlantic, they couldn't see to use the drift meter. They couldn't see the stars, and Mark needed to take a sighting, and he brought out a hiking GPS that was the emergency kit in his pocket. And when they when the sky above them opened, managed to get a fix on Polaris, and knew that they had calculated their way in the right direction. But he did use compasses and an astrolabe as well, so to try and emulate the great feat of that first flight.
And then the last question from Stephen Taylor: what was the original Vimy designed to do? Was she a bomber?
She was a heavy bomber, yes, and that was the idea. She would be strapped with bombs, which they let go manually, I think. But having not seen service after the war, some of them were used for practice for parachute jumps, and some there was eventually a Vimy commercial that flew backwards and forwards to Belgium, I think, in closed cockpit with just a few passengers. But there wasn't really any use for her after the war, which is why there were some available in 1919 and 1920 to reenact these 3 fantastic flights.
Thank you, Jenny.
That's marvelous. Just 2 more messages, Jenny. One from past master mariner, that's Captain Flavian de Souza, who says, "Dear Jenny, that was fantastic presentation of the past and the repeat. Thank you very much." And also, can we say hello to Holly Rosenberg from Kenosha in Wisconsin, USA, just on the edge of Lake Michigan, I believe. Holly, nice to see you back for a second month. Hopefully you'll stay around for the wash up afterwards. That'll be great. Anyway, at this point, I think you're questioned out, Jenny. And I wonder whether you'd like to do the honors and tell us about next month's lecture.
Fiona's going to do that, since you've heard so much.
Oh, there I'll be.
I'll be quick. Yes, so the next lecture is on Monday, the 12th of July, and it's going to be given by 2 HCMM past masters, Captain Malcolm Parrott and John Captain John Freestone, and the title is Voyaging Across the Isthmus of Panama in Central America. So another very different lecture for us to look forward to. Once again, we would like to extend, everybody at the Trust would like to extend our thanks to everybody for coming to the lectures and for donating. It's amazing what you've all done, and you know that it helps us run the ship, and it is very much appreciated by everybody. Thank you.
And I would endorse that as well, if I may, but not in doing that. I would also like to say, Jenny, thank you so much. With everything I know you've got on your plate at the moment, associated with the Trust to do, you and your teams, this has been a fantastic lecture, a memorable one. And I'm really, really grateful. We all are, I think, for the time you've spent this evening. And I hope everyone's enjoyed that evening. With that, we come to the end of the formal part of the evening. And if you'd like to stay on, as I said at the top of the lecture, do just remain there, and you will be brought back in, those who remain, and let's carry on, possibly with a glass in hand. Thank you all very much for coming, and we look forward to maybe seeing you back at the next lecture in the month of July, second Monday, whatever date that may be. Thank you, and good night.
Can't see anybody.
We've got Roger Huffling.
Yes.
Nobody else seems to be coming in at the moment, but we'll leave it up to Matt to do the magic.
Oops.
There it is. There's something.
Sorry. Get rid of it.
That's all right.
This is Holly. May I say something?
Hi, Holly. Welcome.
Hi, Alistair. Hi,
how are you?
Genesee. Hi, Jenny. Thank you for the lovely talk. Marvelous. I'm going to watch it on YouTube, and I want to tell you, I'm going to track this Vimy reenactment with my 1961 World Globe that I still have when I was 7 years old, and it still has French West Africa on it.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, Jenny, where was the was that farmhouse? What did you say, or what was the name of? I took notes because I know it'll take a while till this goes on YouTube. So I was writing ferocious notes on all three flights as you were talking. What was the name of it? Foulwood?
The name of
Farnborough? Was it?
What's it called?
Was it? Oh, Farnborough, was it?
Yes. How do you spell it?
Oh, Farnborough. Oh, yeah.
Oh, Farnborough?
Yeah.
F-A-R-N. Is that what you're talking about, Holly?
Yeah, a farm. Wait, I'm writing this down. I'm writing it wrong. I'm writing Farmwood. Farnborough.
F-A-R-N.
B-O-R. Is that right?
Yeah, B-O-R.
O-U-G-H.
O-U-G-H.
Oh, Farnborough. Okay.
Yeah.
Farnborough. Yeah.
Farnborough. Farnborough, you say, on the other side of the
It's this
pond.
English accent. That's the trouble.
Farnborough. Okay. And I also want to ask one more question. Where was the celebratory dinner in Clifton? What was that, at a hotel, or was that at the golf course?
No, it was at the Alcock and Brown Hotel.
Oh, yes, I wrote that down, but I wasn't sure Alcock and Brown will have a hotel.
Clifton is the most lovely little town right on the west point of
I have actually embraced that purely by accident when I was listening, to Prince Philip when he died, and somehow by hook or crook, they were playing a song that I liked the song, and I tracked down the name of the song, and I tracked down that the person who sang it, his father-in-law lived in the Clifton area, Clifton area, and that became my little spot on the map because I am a sucker for water, you know. So yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's great. It's great.
Yep.
Good to see you, Holly.
Good
Also,
to see you too.
being international, David Blake, good evening to you. Welcome back from Cape Town, wherever you are. It is the Cape, I think, isn't it? Just round the corner from Simonstown.
Yeah, well, much closer to Simonstown than Cape Town. Yes.
All right. Yeah. Yeah.
I think the only thing I can really report at the moment was that at the Cape Town area, they've got a marina like most of these sort of big places now, and there was a lot of excitement. The water at the marina was going a sort of a silvery blue color, and it took some time to find out what it was, which was actually, I'm not sure if the collective noun of pod applies to orca killer whales, but anyway, a bunch of killer whales had come and driven all the fish into the marina, and there was no exit for the fish. So they all ran out of oxygen, died, and all the rich patrons in the expensive waterfront apartments had to leave because it was so foul. So that's what's been happening in Cape Town.
That's extraordinary. That didn't make the Daily Telegraph. That's amazing. Mike Oakey, very good to see you.
Hello there. Thanks for letting me in. Jen, congratulations on a wonderful talk. That didn't half bring back memories.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
I think what Jen said about the party after the Vimy landed at Clifton, I mean, she said we had a good time, but oh my God, it was the party of the century.
Fantastic, with lots of Connemara single malt as well, I guess.
Yes,
probably.
yes.
Yeah, I paid an arm and a leg and the rest of it coming out of Ireland when I went back one of those. But by golly, it was great, right down to the last drop.
Absolutely, yeah. And an absolute lake of Guinness we got through.
Exactly. Did you have Connemara ponies lined up, Jen, in case it did go and have the same experience landing at Clifton?
I would have had to just click my fingers and they would have appeared.
Well, of course they would. I mean, it seemed that the whole of your rest of your 3 flights was just like that anyway. In charge as usual, which was terrific. And that's great.
Jenny, to add to this story, there was a Royal Naval destroyer called HMS Vimy that served during the war and did convoys as well as Wellington.
Really?
Yeah. And the father of a great colleague of ours served on board HMS Vimy.
What class was she and what type was she?
She was a two-funneled. She was one of the destroyers built in the 30s, early 30s.
Yeah.
Well, they're not the V&W class.
Of the destroyer. Well, yeah, it wasn't. I'll have to pull out my Janes and have a check.
Yeah, that was interesting. Mr. Shuttleworth, are you volunteering for the next flight when it happens? Or, if I might say so, Commander Shuttleworth?
Yeah, I certainly would. Love to do it. But actually, Jenny, I missed, actually, you did 3 different flights. What was the total from a number of years you were involved from start to finish? A hell of a long time.
15.
Goodness gracious. hadn't hoisted that quite in. Yeah.
Yeah,
I wasn't working on it the whole time, you know.
No,
there were some years in between before we throttled up again.
You did. Yeah, you did make reference, and this one actually, Richard, you might have an observation on this, Richard Shuttleworth, but you mentioned the fact that I think it was Steve Fawcett said he was really having to fight with the aircraft. Was that because of windage or because naturally she was not a very sort of comfortable airworthy aircraft?
I think very basic design and no hydraulics, and
no.
They probably didn't know about balanced ailerons and balanced this, that, and the other.
None of that.
Yeah, trim. So I don't know how authentic the whole thing was. She was made to fly like the original.
Yeah, aerodynamically, she was pretty much identical to the original.
Well, there you are. So she'd be very difficult to fly.
Yeah, the engines were different and there were a few structural changes, but essentially it was the same aerodynamic shape. So
Yeah.
big barn door wings, particularly I would think when it was low on fuel, then the wing loading was quite low. So it means if it caught a gust when you were just coming into land, one of the flights I had, in fact, my first flight in the Vimy, we sort of hit a bit of a gust just as we were 20 feet off the ground, and the whole thing heeled right over. And you know, it's very, very.
It was very wind sensitive.
Physical aeroplane to handle.
Yeah, well, it's such an enormous wingspan as well.
Mm.
It's like flying an albatross. I mean, you know, the birds are 9 foot. Extraordinary.
Few of them.
Yeah. Simon Quayle, very good to see you on there, and thank you again thank you for turning up to the ship, the good ship, yesterday. I hear you were one of the people on board helping the children to show them the new augmented reality, which is great. And Terry Lilly, good evening. Good to see you on here as well. Marvelous. And everybody else. Well, whatever. There we go. Now, where is your brother, David? Where's Johnny Blake? He's AWOL.
I'm not sure if I should split, but I understood that his wife's got a book club meeting or something like that, and so
Good heavens.
it's an online function, and when book club finishes, then he can join the net.
Oh, well, that's very good indeed. What I can do through you, David, his brother, is to mention the as yet unpublished news that John is going to do one of our future lectures. Is that right, Jenny?
That's right.
On the sea chart, his pet topic.
Yes.
On which, for those who don't know, I think he's published about 3, if not 4 books on the subject. Absolutely incredible. They are too. Beautiful, beautiful books. Angela Jacob, good evening to you. Nice to see you again. How are you keeping? All right? You're on mute.
Typical, yes.
Very good to see you indeed. There we are.
So,
Wow.
Simon, can you come off mute and give us put your video on and talk to us about what happened yesterday with the children?
Yeah, that might be a nice thing to do.
He's still there.
He's there.
Well, I'm going to tell you our augmented reality attraction experience that will be open when the ship is open is not only for children but for adults as well, and visitors to the ship. We've taken the wheelhouse of the good ship Wellington, and with the help of the most fabulous augmented reality experts who are working with Royal Opera House and the Birmingham Ballet and the Mary Rose, they're absolutely terrific. They turn what's a real-time experience, if you like. So you stay in real time, but you visit the Wellington when she was on convoy duty in World War II. And there are a couple of experiences on there, and they're still working on it, but tidying it up after the comments from yesterday. You can steer the ship, respond to the captain's orders. And if you steer the ship, the good ship Wellington, the sea is projected onto the windows of the wheelhouse in augmented reality, and you move the ship and she moves up the convoy. Or you can fire the hedgehog bombs and see them hit the water. And then another screen for educational purposes comes down and shows you what happens to the hedgehog bombs as they hit the water. And then a U-boat surfaces and surrenders. So Wellington did her job then, and she's doing her job again now for educational purposes for children. I think we had 23 kids on yesterday in half-an-hour appointments, test appointments, and with our education officer, Rebecca, and our exhibitions officer, Solmaz, and Simon and Robin Batt. And went through the whole experience, and everyone is very excited. So I can't wait to see it.
I had tremendous feedback from Ed Moore, parent of 2 of the children, who is a colleague of mine of 17 years standing. And he was really enthusiastic about it. So it's something I'm looking forward to seeing when it happens.
Jenny, that's really encouraging to hear that.
Good.
We were getting difficulty getting enough children to
Yes.
take part, but that's brilliant doing that.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing experience.
I have been talking with Rebecca, and she's been making new moves to put one of the 10-inch signal projectors.
Yes.
Given from the Naval Museum, from HMS Manchester, on moving it down to the wing of the bridge.
Yes.
So there's another experience for them there.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Which is, if that's going to happen, that's brilliant.
It's absolutely brilliant.
That'll be really great. And that's pretty well where the position it would have been, wouldn't it, Stephen?
No, it was up on the upper bridge on the campus platform.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it'll look good,
Yeah.
particularly as you walk along the embankment to see a signal projector blaring at you.
Yeah. You can send messages to ITN in Morse
Water.
by light. Very good indeed. Yeah. Anyway, there we are.
Well, the other thing, Alistair, may I say, has anybody read the book by Max Hastings on the relief of Malta in 1942? Operation.
No, not yet.
What's it called?
Pedestal.
Pedestal. Of course, we've got on board, well, the Master Mariners have on board, you know, the wheel and the bell, and that wonderful painting of the Ohio saving Malta in 1942. And there's been quite a bit of publicity about it, saying how important to the Second World War that actual convoy was, with 2 aircraft carriers sunk and God knows what, the largest convoy of the war. And it's always, to me, it's been a part of the Wellington has been that, although the ship didn't take part in it, because we've got all the there's all the key things on board that came from that convoy, like the wheel and the ship's bell, salvaged from the Ohio when she went down alongside in Grand Harbour, having got rid of all that fuel and pumped that into the Spitfires that were flying from Lucca Airport.
She had an Axis aircraft. Was it a Messerschmitt or an Italian? I can't remember. Embedded somewhere up at the forward.
It was a Stuka.
It was a Stuka, was it?
Landed on the forecastle. Yeah.
She had 2, one on the forecastle and one down aft.
Really?
Yeah. And then when they boarded her for about the 3rd time, they tidied things up a bit and threw bits of the plane over the side. So when she went along, when she actually went into Grand Harbour, I think they weren't as evident as perhaps they might have been.
Yeah, interesting. She is now, her resting place is outside the harbour. I think she was towed out subsequently, wasn't she, after the war?
Oh, I'm here.
And
I'm
she
not
was
sure. Yeah.
I think she was sunk just off the harbour, or a little way
Yeah,
out.
she actually, as she went down, as they were taking all the fuel out,
Yeah.
she was sinking. And
Yeah.
so she was alongside, opposite old St. Angelo. And she got rid of all her oil and petrol and fuel and kerosene and what have you in about 4 hours. And then her back broke and she sank to the bottom. So whether she was recovered.
She was, I think she was obviously she couldn't stay there in the harbour. She was salvaged after the war, I think, or refloated. I can't remember. I'm not getting my facts right, but I know she was dropped somewhere off the approach into the harbour.
Yes.
Eventually, or resunk. Yeah, interesting. You talk about this Max Hastings book, Stephen.
Yes.
Is this a recent publication?
Yes, very new.
Didn't know about that.
It's been out about a month.
There have been so many books on it. I've got one here, as it happens.
Yeah.
By a chap called Peter Elliott, The Cross and the Ensign, A Naval History of Malta, 1798 to 1979.
Yeah.
Can you see that?
Yeah.
That belonged to my late father-in-law, who died last year at the age of 101. And it was published in, just having a look, published in 80.
Right.
Many books on Malta. Terribly, terribly important bit of history. The Eagle sank in 6 minutes.
Yes.
He took 4 torpedoes at close range.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah. There we are. Do you think we ought to call it an evening and go and actually there's a message. This topic re Malta would make good future talk for Wellington Trust. Absolutely spot on right.
It would.
Yeah.
There we are.
The person who's probably knows most about it is Graham Pepper.
Really.
He's done a huge amount of research in the archives over the years. And Angus always put out a sort of page a day over the days Operation Pedestal was run.
It's very good reading, isn't it, Stephen?
To members of the Honourable Company.
Yeah. Every year.
Yeah.
And also,
Angus might he might be the man to give a talk on it.
I think it'd be rather splendid that. Well, perhaps they can both do it.
Yes.
But it is a fact, and I hope it's still happening, although we are in a pandemic, that the Maltese flag, Angus used to make sure that on the foremast, that
Yes.
on the starboard pennant, that the Malta flag was worn during the time of the pedestal convoy, and the ambassador, whoever he may be, used to make a point of driving past the ship to see his national flag worn there.
But there is a political aspect to it that I believe the Maltese government are trying to get back the wheel and the bell, have been for a number of years. There's been an ongoing battle between the masterman, between the HCMM and the Maltese government on the artifacts.
Well, there we are.
They say it's Maltese. It was what saved us.
We can give them the marbles if you want, but they can't have the wheel.
Replica will do. Surely a replica.
A replica would do very nicely. Absolutely right, Terence. Why not?
Because I think the wheel came from Mrs. Mason, who was the widow of the captain of the Ohio, and he was an old Conwegian.
Really?
Yeah.
I never knew where that came from.
And she gave it. Well, he wanted it to go to the ship when he died.
Yeah, and the bell as well.
The bell, yes, which he had salvaged whilst he was there in Malta in 42.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, David, you just sent a message again. Let's have a look. Missed that. Hold on a second. There we go. There's a chat. This is. If you do make this Malta talk and record it, I would be keen to flight this at Ship Society in Cape Town. Why not?
Oh,
there's a good one. We shall make it so, David.
Well, thank you so much, because I say thank you so much because that means a free evening for one of us.
There we are. You filled an evening. We'll make it so. Very good indeed. Look, everybody, my blood sugar is getting very low. I think I need fish and chips or something. I'm not sure, whatever. But thank you all very much for coming on. And by all means, stay on if you wish to. But I think probably at this point, with your permission, I'm going to depart and take my tie off. Thank you very much all for coming. Good to see you again. See you next time.
Everyone.
Good
night.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.